So this evening I decided to take a look at a couple of machines. The one that you saw on the right was a Ferguson 3V23, and the one that we're about to look at is a Ferguson 3V35. Now, I've had both these machines for some time, and the 23 will be featuring in an upcoming video where I take the 23 and another 23 that I've got and make one good one out of two slightly duff ones, let's say. So what I decided to do with the 35 is just to fire it up and see what happened. Just give it a rudimentary sort of basic clean, if possible not replace any belts, and just, you know, sort of try and bring it back to life. Now the 35 actually was bought off of eBay, cost me about £5, so I'm not really into it for sort of any kind of sort of huge amount of financial outlay, so I wanted to do the minimum to it as possible. So what I did was I just did the old standard vacuum, so with a soft brush on the vacuum, basically to get rid of any dust on all of the relevant circuit boards. I then gave the idler a clean, and after sort of reading some YouTube comments, I decided against actually using fine emery paper or fine grade sandpaper to actually sort of rejuvenate the tyres on those idlers, as I've been advised that that's actually sort of more detrimental than it is actually sort of a positive thing to do. Also brings us on to the interesting discussion about head cleaning. Now, my traditional approach has always been just to sort of cover the entire head drum area with video head cleaner, and then use sort of a fine lint-free piece of cloth just to gently sort of clean the area down. Again, this is you know, sort of another area that has been open to debate, and something else that evidently I've been doing wrong all this time. According to certain sources, depends where you read, depends who you ask, the best method is to use a piece of paper, usually print paper or something like that, so, you know, sort of standard A4 paper. Cover that with, so saturate that with video head cleaner, and then just gently sort of rub the heads against that, or sort of rub the head drum against it, rotate the head drum, and do it that way. To be perfectly honest, with this particular machine, I decided to leave the heads alone, as I'm going to operate an approach of don't touch the video heads for cleaning purposes unless I absolutely have to. I did clean the pinch roller, the erase head, and the audio control heads in the normal way, just using some video head cleaner and a lint-free cloth. Now, what I also did was I lubricated using some silicone grease the loading path, so basically where the loading arms reside, just basically gently lubricated that with some of the silicone grease. Now, I found a strange plastic object in the bowels of the machine, which I don't know what it was, so that went to the bin. And I also initially had some trouble taking this board out. It actually transpires I was doing it the right way, so you don't need to undo those 3 screws which I'm undoing. They're on little hinges which will flip up. There are 2 clips either side of the board, a larger one to the far right, and that smaller one that you can see there, and there's a little notch in the board that smaller one sits into. And obviously what has happened over the years is it's just sort of become sort of slightly tight and a little bit too snug. You also need, as I discovered after this particular stage, to remove the front panel. So the entire front panel needs to come off, and then there is a multi-plug which goes from that baseboard to a connector on the front panel. You unplug that connector, as you can see that I'm doing there, and the board then lifts up, and this gives you ample access to the underside of the machine. So you can check the capstan drive belt, and you can also lubricate, if needs be, anything that needs lubricating under there. I didn't notice anything that needed lubrication under there, so I put it all back together. The capstan drive belt did not feel unnecessarily dry. and it still had quite a bit of tension, so I left it as it was. It is worth replacing these belts if the machine has been dormant for a very long period of time and you're unsure of when they were last replaced. But because I didn't want to expend too much, I didn't really want to spend too much on this machine, I decided to obviously, as I was saying before, just do the bare minimum. However, the bare minimum actually seemed to be more than enough. Now, as you can see, what I'm initially trying to do here is just to play back this cassette, and as you can see, it has snagged slightly because the idler is not clean. So what I did was I just used this cloth here, ran it over the spools, the take-up spools for so the right hand and left hand take-up spool, and also just worked it over the idler as well. Spent quite a bit of time actually doing that, so a good few minutes or so, actually just sort of making sure that the idler was thoroughly clean. And I think in action of actually doing this with this cloth, it has sort of brought back some of the roughness to the actual rubber that was there. It's what actually happens when I put the tape back in again, as you can see here. If we go for oh yeah, that was it. I just needed to lubricate the eject mechanism as well, just to sort of tidy things up a bit. But when we pop the tape back in and we go for a playback, the machine started to play back perfectly. Go into a fast forward and rewind mode. Took a little bit of persuasion, but as you can see here, it is able to completely fast forward and also rewind. So what I did, and something I've started doing with all the machines that I repair from now on, is I actually start with a tape right at the beginning of the cassette. So a cassette that's basically right at the beginning. Tail out, as I think they call it. So usually means that the either side of the spool, either spool has got the clear plastic leader exposed. So the majority of the tape is actually inside the cassette housing. Apparently that's the ideal way to store them as well. Obviously in a dry environment, but also tails out and in a case. So what I did was I basically fast forwarded and then allowed the machine to do its automatic rewind of one single cassette, just to sort of really just give it a bit of an exercise. As you can see here, the front panel was held in with one single Phillips screw, and those obviously locating lugs to the left and the right of the unit. Now what I also did was I just used a bit of video head cleaner on the front of the machine just to give it a general clean up, and once the machine had been reassembled, it was ready for testing. Obviously you need to put the lower panel back on, and unusually there were a large number of screws to this bottom panel, which I found unusual. But once it all goes back together and sits together quite nicely, you're able to commence the testing procedure. So I just used the standard Samson flat panel that we have here in the living room, and just used the standard RF output on the machine to test. I was actually quite surprised at just how good the quality for VHS, the quality of picture and sound this machine produced actually was. It just goes to show that JVC, when they produced a machine, they produced a machine certainly back in the 1980s with less features for a cheaper price, but they didn't compromise or skimp on the picture quality. So you would still get equal quality and sound, just about, to some of the more expensive machines in the range, albeit without stereo sound, which I think the 3V36 had, or a multi-function timer or other things like that. So here we are with one of the sort of examples of the playback here. And it really isn't too bad. You know, VHS was always a bit muddy as regards colour reproduction. We've gone into that before. It's very much to do with a lower colour frequency than Betamax. So Betamax colours always sort of just pop a little bit more. They always seem a bit more vibrant, and the picture is ever so slightly sharper. Pause and still frame, as you can see here, is as you would expect from a two-head machine. bit of noise, but you know, it's not the end of the world. It does work, and it does work fairly well. But overall, the actual sound quality, I was quite surprised at. You're just using a linear audio track. There's no noise reduction or anything like that. And I was really rather impressed. Anyway, if you had found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button, and also consider subscribing for more upcoming and fascinating hobbies. Thanks for watching.